we kind of started hitting on some of that stuff. So let's take a look at a little bit of nuts and bolts, as far as we don't need to be ultra specific on weights or anything like that, but just some concepts as far as some things that you've enjoyed doing, and how you've enjoyed building a beer like this in the past. You know, you had kind of mentioned already that there's, on some level, you've got to be leaning on some adjunct when you're making a beer like this, or at least that's one way to do it. You know, because sometimes if you're going all malt, there's a lot of things you can do, but there's certain things you can't. You know,
Right.
so yeah. So I mean, what are some of those? You know, was it kind of a one and done thing? So when I made Escape, that recipe has changed very, very, very little, because it's this is not, I would say it's quite rare. Usually I'm consistently tweaking things, you know, trying to get better, more efficient, this, that, and the other. But Escape was one of those, the pina colada beer, where it just kind of you know, worked the first time, and yeah, so you kind of stick with it. Has there been any tweaking to the adjuncts that you've utilized over time, and what adjuncts do you think are beneficial when you're making a beer like this?
Yeah, good question. Very good question. So, yeah, a lot of it does rely on the adjuncts. And at Butcher and the Brewer, I did not change it more than once or twice.
Yeah.
And that was more of a titration of the adjuncts than it was the base. The base is probably unsurprisingly very much like a hazy base. You know, a lot of oats, a lot of malted wheat. Tried raw wheat, didn't really like that.
Yep.
And I think but this is just the way that I'm doing it. And I think there's lots of ways to skin this thing. And
Sure.
I think 100% depends on what the brewer wants to choose for their yeast. I think is kind of the bigger one. Like this, Phobia changed more than Albino did. So Phobia went through a couple iterations of different base malts.
Yep.
Not by choice of the beer, just because that was happening in the brewery, and also by choice. Adding caramel malts, removing caramel malts. Didn't like the caramel malts. We keep it pale, and then it went through different yeasts. It went through Chico, and it went through London 3 and London 1, and maybe another British one. But I think we all kind of found that while it was cool, it was pale. It was like pale yellow hazy. It felt weird that it was, and it tasted a little bit cleaner with Chico. So we like to use a clean yeast on it, ferment it kind of cool.
Yeah.
And let the malt kind of speak for itself cleanly, plainly, and then let the adjuncts do the rest of the work to bring that coffee chocolate kind of caramel backbone.
Well, you know, I think it's interesting that when discussing the grist, you talk about it kind of as a hazy build, because you know that does make a lot of sense. That
and hazy's not a thing then either.
Oh, for sure, right? For sure.
2014, like.
Yeah, to start creeping in around then. I'm trying to think. I think in Michigan, the first place that really hit was Old Nation, and that was probably maybe 2015, 2016, maybe 2017, because I think by 2017 that was already like a 99-point beer on whatever, and you know, people are M43, yeah, people are trading for it and stuff. But you know, that style is interesting from a build standpoint, because you know, I remember originally when people started chasing that beer style, right? There was a lot of very slurry heavy beers that were hitting the market. So like even when you like you would get a pint, and it would, like, by the time you were done, there would be some left in the bottom of your pint, right? Yeah, right. A little treat, a little vitamin B12 down there.
Delicious.
And so, but you know, I think over time, you know, more people have understood how to build that style out. And I remember some friends and I talking about it, and we're like, okay, well, let's think about other beers that are traditionally hazy, and you think about wit beer, and you think about hef, and different things like that. So I do think it's interesting that you're talking about that. It is almost kind of that build, because you do want to be utilizing those, that it does make sense to want to be utilizing those oats for kind of some of that beta glucan, some of that softness, that viscosity, right? And then also some of that softness of the wheat too. So now when you're building a beer like this, do you want it to be is it brilliantly clear? Is it best to have a haze in this beer to kind of push that white kind of look to it?
Originally, that's what we were going for by switching to some of the London and British yeast that might throw that haze.
Sure.
And we were successful in getting that haze for a little while in Phobia. But I don't think any of us liked it. It seemed to make it more muddy and kind of fatty feeling in the mouth, and I don't think that was nice. So the oats and the wheat produce a very nice, clean, kind of silky, pillowy.
Sure.
Oh my.
Yeah.
I can't say pillowy.
No, I'm good with pillowy. I got no problem with pillowy.
Buzzwords. It's a buzzword. Pillowy citra. Anyway, but it produces. It definitely gives that off, and we find that with Chico, we get a really nice. If you start with a nice bright wort, you get a really nice bright. It seems even more, I think, surprising to the end consumer when you can see right through it, and it still tastes like this
Sure.
thick, like, and the biggest part of that, besides the grist bill, is obviously like a really high mash temp. Like,
okay, so yeah,
bordering on too high.
So yeah, getting into the mash here a little bit. We already talked about, kind of stacking up some wheat and oats in there to kind of build that up to go pillowy. And but you're talking really, so like how high? Are you like I mean,
like 158, like
yeah, when you're pushing it,
like
good for you, man. That's wild.
I don't love this, but like,
so
156, 158, yeah.
What does that do? So like, I mean, and if you don't know the exact numbers off the top, and I don't know if I would be able to answer this on my system, but what do you see the swing on your system? Like, can you? Like, how much does that tend to increase? Like, so most of your beers are mashed in around what temperature? What's that primary rest? Because I believe are you step mashing?
We step mash. Yeah. We have the ability to step mash in a really nice way. Yeah. So every beer's pretty much completely different.
Oh, okay.
The IPAs.
Sure.
The IPAs are. I mean, the average, I guess, would say like IPA 152 to 154 range. Yeah. Typical.
Yeah.
Kolsch 149.
Yep.
Up to 162.
Yep.
Phobia, I believe, is a single rest at 156.
Okay.
And our malt that we're getting from Origin has a really high DP, and so we're finding that it converts quickly.
Yeah.
So, which is nice, because at 156 or 158, it's like it's not going super fast,
Sure.
And you kind of risk, skipping one of the rests. So, yeah, I think it's only 60 minutes at 156, and then we mash out, straight to mash out.
Yeah. No, that's cool. And so you're getting and so just to be clear, Phobia is the current is the White Stout in its existence now, correct?
Phobia, yes, it is. Phobia was one of our core beers when we first started almost 6 years ago, and it's FAUXBIA, because like faux is fake, phobia, fear of the dark kind of thing. I know it's not actually, phobia is not a fear of the dark. Fear of the dark is, I think it's I forget what it's called, damn, but that is a phobia, like the fear of that is the phobia. So anyway, it's not a perfect name, but we worked on that. And the first can was super cool, and the next can is amazing too. But the first can had this like really creepy, like what was that album from Tool? Schism, I think it was. It had this like this crazy looking eye on it. And like it looks like it's creepy. I mean, I honestly I love the way that our art is now. It's much more. It's better. But yeah, it was just I don't know where was I going with this.
Oh, we were talking. We're just kind of making sure people knew that Phobia was the white
Oh yeah,
stout, and
Phobia,
then
right, Phobia.
kind of looking at parameters of a little bit because we are talking about mash and that you're mashing in higher, and so
Right.
I'm ultimately leading to kind of like starting finishing gravity type range.
Sure.
So,
So Phobia was the core beer, and then it left maybe after year two for about a year. And we shrunk the core and changed the core completely. But now we make it as it's kind of like a cult favorite. Oddly, it's I think it's one of the top 4 or 5 most checked in beers by Saucy, and
nice.
we've not made it that much
Sure.
at all really. So now we brought it back, and it's kind of an alternating skew with our Hefeweizen for 6 months and Phobia for 6 months.
Sure.
And it has a bigger brother that came out. It's come out twice. This year we brought it out as the way that Phobia is normally pronounced in the pub, which is Foxbia.
For sure.
Give me can I have a Foxbia?
Yeah.
Like, you can, and now it's 9.5%. So we have Phobia at 5.4 and Foxbia at 9.5.
Okay.
So that's the bigger brother.
5-4. That's interesting. So 5-4. Where does that beer tend to finish? Because you are pushing that up with the mash.
Yeah, that beer starts at 15.4, I want to say.
Okay.
And ends probably in the low fours, high threes, something like that.
For us, yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense because we'll talk pretty frequently about how you need to have a certain amount of residual sugar in order to amplify adjunct character in a beer. And it doesn't even have to be adjunct. I do think sometimes there's even something to like you can look at some hazies out there and some of the ones that are really, really popping with super juicy, right? But people are making some really high residual sweetness hazies, man. Like I was listening to an interview the other day where one guy was like, "Oh, we go really dry, and we're down, we're down 10, 14, 10, 16." And I'm like, "Wow, man, some people must
really dry, huh?
Yeah, right." I mean, it's style relative, right? But I do think that I can't imagine that there needs to be some measure of residual sweetness for a beer like this. And especially if you're not throwing a lot of non-fermentables in there, you're probably going to want to really need to be able to drive that through the mash.
For sure. And you need dextrin malt in this beer. Or some. I mean, you can control it with the mash, but it does help to add dextrin malt. The problem with dextrin malt is it's 10 Lovabond-ish or more. And it on a beer that's supposed to be super blonde, and when you add the adjuncts, you do get a little bit of color pickup. So you gotta stay blonde on it, and so it's kind of hard to add dextrin malt. But I think we do have probably 55 pounds in that mash.
Sure.
Yeah, we do actually.
So we're digging into the mash a little bit, and I do know, when we talk about adjunct, you mentioned chocolate, coffee, and I know people have a lot of different takes on things. I've heard of people using anything from, and now it's probably up to how different people pronounce it, but like star anise or star anise, I'm not sure how different people pronounce that, but it's essentially like a black licorice, incorporating something like black licorice, something on the cocoa component, something on the coffee component, and even some different warm things. I've heard you mentioned vanilla, and when I say warm, I know some people have even worked like with maybe a little hair of cinnamon as well to kind of lift something like that. What's kind of your go-to adjunct type things to magnify this? And has that changed over time? Like, have you used different types or just different brands?
Yeah, and we kind of alluded to it earlier with the brands of extract. So the brand that we were using for Albino Stout doesn't make that coffee extract anymore. So that immediately switched. And the brands now, no, we use one brand for this as Saucy, and the mix has. Oh, sorry, I should take that back. No, it has changed since we started to now. We originally, because that manufacturer stopped making the one or two of the products we were using, we started to move into like Chilaka,
Hmm.
and that did not work
I was gonna say, what was your experience like with
at all.
that? Because I've used that on occasion, and I'll tell you, I've really struggled. I haven't done a lot of chocolate beer, but I had struggled. I've struggled getting chocolate character that I want just out of the some version of the raw ingredient.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm with you. The Chilaka, I don't know if we handled it properly. I mean, we went by the manufacturer's recommendations, and nothing to say that
Sure,
I don't know. It just didn't come across the way that we thought it was going to come across, and we were better off in this application at least with an extract that was pretty high potency for chocolate,
sure,
like some kind of chocolate extract,
sure,
and because it had to have the least color pickup possible. So we
definitely.
found a manufacturer that makes like this super high concentrated stuff, and it's not visible really. I think we pick up 4 or 5 probably. That'd be my guess. I don't know if we measured it, but that's
Sure,
about how much I guess you pick up from that extract. And the
sure.
coffee extract, we use a coffee extract as well. And that has not changed. Circulating on coffee turns it into kind of blonde cold brew, and that
Yeah,
doesn't like you don't want it to be a coffee beer. You want it to
yeah.
be a roasty kind of chocolatey, savory, kind of thing.
Yeah, I can
And
see that
I love that.
actually, because that was, that's an obvious thing to talk about with trying to make a beer like this, and so I'm glad you mentioned that, because yeah, I mean, you do hit that, you do hit that space. Just on a complete side note, I think it's Cato over at Sonder, when you guys have been down, have you had their coffee
I
Kolsch over
have
there?
not had that, and we have a
Dude,
beer
that's
named Kato too.
it's oh no, maybe it's Voss for them. No. I think it's Cato, because
Yeah.
they have a Kolsch that's Voss, and I think Cato is their coffee Kolsch.
I'm trying that.
If
Sounds
that's up
delicious.
when you're on, dude, they absolutely kill it with that. But that's just an aside. So so no, that's interesting stuff. Kind of looking at the kettle side of things when we're going to be talking about our hop additions. Where do you come down on kind of what you're shooting for IBU with a beer like this? And we'll keep in mind that you're talking about like a mid 5% take on it, right?
Yeah, the mid 5% take. I mean, the hops don't really matter. It's kind of like I saw a talk by shoot Jacobson, the Crooked Stave dude,
Chad
and
Jacobson, yeah,
Chad Jacobson. That's
yeah,
right. And
yeah,
I remember his talk was called "Fuck Your IBUs." I was like, yeah, which I'm generally like, yeah, and all beers. I know he's talking about like sours and Brett's.
Sure,
Yeah, Chad, yeah. That dude's a wizard with Brett.
yeah.
But I kind of take that same approach with albino or the white stout, with phobia. I typically go for 10 to 15. Just it's
Yeah.
there. It's just a little bit of bitterness, and I guess it would be a real stretch to say that I'm shooting for a certain kind of stout. 'Cause I'm not like
Sure.
I
No,
just
no,
want
no.
to. Does it taste kind of like stout? Like yeah. Is it white? Like. And then we kind of got there, like, you know what I mean?
Well,
Like, I'm not shooting for like a Russian style. Like, I could see the star anise or those kinds of things for like a Russian. I
yeah,
could see that. If it was
yeah.
hoppier, if you want to go for like an American stout, I could see that.
No,
It just might be kind of seemed like a far cry at the time. So
sure, and I think especially when you're talking about something, I think I think there's a time and place for style, and I think that's great. But when you are talking outside of those ranges, you're you don't have to be worried about, you have to think about the beer itself, right? So
yeah,
like really, and because it's speculation for me. So like when I'm the questions I'm asking you on this, like I don't know the answers ahead of time, and
yeah. I guess
so
we didn't
like
talk about it.
no, and so like but everything falls into place, because in my mind, when I'm doing if I'm going to be doing an adjuncted stout, right? um it starts to get more difficult the more bitter you make that beer, right? As far as being, because first of all, you're going to start doing what bitterness does, which is balanced sweetness, and you need that sweetness in order to help amplify some of your specialty adjunct character in the beer,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, for
And
sure.
so you know, I was expecting to hear it. My guess is, if I was going to spitball, I would be like, it's probably got to be 20 or under, because you don't want to start putting yourself in a competitive space where that bitterness is starting to battle the other components of the
Right.
beer. All you're doing is, so you're really just using that bitterness as something to say there's enough to foil the volume of sweetness to keep the beer drinkable. Are we on the same? Is that where we're?
Yeah, and if your next question was, what variety, it doesn't.
It
It
doesn't
doesn't really
matter.
matter.
It's
It's all
IBU.
60-minute.
That's the other thing. So that's what I was gonna say. So I'm guessing you're not like trying to, like, feather in some fuggles or something and late on here for a little English character. You know what I mean?
No,
And,
no.
and I like to do that too. Like I don't think I don't think your adjunct beers where people are expecting adjunct is the time to, like, just do the thing, right? Like that, you don't necessarily need those, those late noble additions that maybe somebody likes to put in. That can be fine. That can be fine in some instances, but in something like this, I think people are looking to get smacked with
Yeah.
something. Yeah.
This is not a hoppy beer.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah, and also I want to redeem Chalaka because they have the chocolate. I'm sure is fine, and I just haven't used it the right way. But I did like their coconut. The one way I use it, I would use it a little bit different the next time. But we did that Lachancia tart pina colada with that coconut, and it was dope. So I won't slander.
That's what we
Chalaka
use.
anymore.
That's what we use in our pina colada, man. And
You mean this guy? It's my next beer.
Yeah.
Brought to you
That's
by
what.
Cartridge.
That's right. That's right. That's the I've been impressed with that product. It's I do think coconut is one of those that it in my mind, if you're trying to make the best possible coconut beer, I just think there's something about some, you gotta have some of the real deal, but you've gotta accent it with extract, man. And
Yeah, for sure.
And we talk plenty on here about, sometimes, I went to a talk at CBC 2022, and it was Beechwood Barbecue. I always blank on his name whenever I'm trying to talk about him publicly. Julian Trago. And he was talking about making fruit beer. And he said, we kind of need to get over this idea of saying, well, you can't use extracts in beer. And like he was saying, and how I've been doing it as well. And a lot of other people do too. Sometimes for various reasons, sometimes the most effective way is to just plain use extract, just plain use the real thing, or sometimes it's using both. I mean, ultimately you're trying to leverage what's most effective for the beer you're making.
Yeah, I mean, from a purist standpoint, like, or point of view, yeah, I get wanting to use exactly exactly this, exactly that, like, and that would be cool if you were only serving yourself from, like, the purist standpoint. Sure. Because what's going to come across, like, you're not starting with a base that doesn't taste like anything. Like, adding stuff to seltzer and things of that nature, like, you have a very clear idea, like, there's nothing here. This will be exactly what what it tastes like, what the contribution is. But with beer, you have a base. You have depending on what you do, you have a very flavorful, maybe estery, it could be clean base, doesn't matter. You have a different starting point, and because of that variable, extracts and fruit, both of them, neither of them taste exactly like you think they would coming through. Just a lot, like hops don't either. They don't. These are peachy, whatever. Like, it doesn't come across that way depending on how you use it. So
sure.
I think it's if you're looking for, and I think a good example is a beer we made last year, I Can Teach Blue.
Hmm.
So the original one was a strawberry milkshake IPA called I Can Teach You.
Sure.
But I'd have to, anyway. And so I Can Teach Blue was the blueberry version, and we used some blueberries in it.
Hmm.
But it turns out that blueberries don't taste like blueberries when you use them in beer. They taste like kind of muddled and not exactly like anything. And so we found that plum tasted more like blueberry, so we used more plum in it than
Hmm.
blueberry.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
it also benefits from a little bit of extract because some fruits they have the sweetness and the flavor of the fruit and maybe the acid of the fruit, but they don't always have that
100%.
the flavor or
Yeah.
like the aroma. The aroma is like the first thing that's lost. And always
Yes.
and like even in grapefruit beers, like a little touch of grapefruit extract makes a huge difference.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's really true. It's really true. I'm a big believer in that. Thanks, brother. Thank you.
Loving where
Oh,
this is at right now, by the way. It smells
awesome,
great.
man. Thank you.
It's
Thank you.
and it's like the thing you can say like with coconut, like you can border on sunscreen like pretty
Sure.
easily.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
this is
Definitely.
not that, not even a little
Definitely.
bit. It's
Thank
great.
you. And that's where honestly it's that Cholaka product that I use in that because they have the coconut as well. I just think it's just such a great it's just such a great product. I used that for the first time in a, you know, it was a coconut stout, and I had been making coconut beers for some years, and so they came out with that, and I'm like, oh, I'll run it back in a stout, and so we did kind of like a tropical stout, like, you know, a little bit more stylistically in that tropical stout range around 7%. And then we hit it with that coconut, you know, and maybe a little ester profile and that roast, whatever. So it was a tasty beer. And, but you just pull, you pull a depth of, there's this legitimate, and it's not massive in that beer there, but there's a genuine coconut flesh and I say coconut fat flavor.
Mm-hmm.
If you know what I mean, like
Yeah.
because there is something fatty to coconut too a little bit.
Yeah.
And
It's almost like the difference between coconut water and like cream of coconut. Like it has that like
yeah, yeah.
unctuous character to
Yep.
it.
Yeah. So no, that's I'm on the same spot as you. That's a product that I really enjoy. I really enjoy working with. We did discuss fermentation, and you said you've kind of worked the spectrum with this one, as far as things from British strains to American strains, and kind of being most comfortable with Chico, and that makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense. And then so we're kind of rolling into, you know, the finishing, the finishing, carbonation, packaging side of things, which is kind of a catch-all for, you know, is there anything, do you like this beer to be, you know, spot on 2.5 volumes of carbonation? Do you like a little lighter? Do you like that carbonation dialed up a little higher? Where do you think a beer like this serves best?
Yeah, and I good question. And I think that like if you mirror kind of what a lot of stouts kind of do, that a little bit on the lighter side, I think benefits it. So we like to package around 2.55,
Mm-hmm.
2.5, and knowing we're gonna drop down to like 2.4,
Sure.
2.45. Yeah,
Sure.
too prick like and the other thing like is it can kind of get prickly, which
Yeah.
doesn't really match a stout profile for me. That kind of like carbonic bite kind of thing.
Yeah. And you
So
know,
2.4.
yeah, and I do think it's not everything, but I do think it's kind of one of the intangibles, and I know people have different thoughts on this. And you know, we mentioned hazy earlier, and you know, I think you can kind of walk a line. I think you can go with a lower carb and hazy, and it'll help to, I think it can help to create some softer edges on it, right?
Yeah,
The
for
flip
sure.
side is, though, when you push that carb up, that beer jumps out of the glass at a different level than it does when it can kind of potentially push some aromatics
Yeah,
out.
like and out permanently.
Sure,
Like yeah,
hey,
if
that
you
too.
if you're there to smell right, yeah,
Yeah.
and if you're there to smell them, cool. If you're
Yep.
not, like,
Yep.
yeah. So
For
that I
sure.
can't. Yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough balance on this, and I think, you know, if anyone's gonna mess around with a white stout anytime soon, you know, uh, I would go low, I
Sure.
guess. But
No,
yeah,
it makes sense.
obviously play with it like anything else. Yeah.
Sure. No, that makes sense. And then so the adjuncts that you're talking about are going in on cold side. Are they going
Yeah.
into? Are they going into bright?
Post filter bright side. Yeah.
Post filter
Yeah.
bright side. And
Yep.
you're running a centrifuge over there, correct?
And we run a Fuge. We run an SPX. Really, really, really beautiful Fuge. And we can control the output density, the turbidity going out. Basically by change. Well, it has a parameter where it won't let it leave if it's too high, but you can also vary that by back pressure a little bit, and also just the pure gallons per minute kind of coming out of it. So the faster we run that thing, I mean, it lets stuff stay in a little bit more. But no matter what, you're never really going much over 400 or 500, ppm of turbidity.
Sure.
So I think that beer probably comes out around 350 for us.
Sure.
But it comes out almost brilliantly bright every time now.
Yeah.
Wasn't something that I was looking for necessarily, and I guess I didn't really have an expectation, but it was nice when it came that way.
Sure.
I kind of like, and that's a deeper conversation about beers, but kind of letting them become their own thing, and kind of not having a set guideline to what you think is going to happen with it.
Sure. Well, why don't you tell me a little bit more about that?
All right. I love that your cup is by Blickman. That's amazing.
The Yeti, man. It's no joke.
Yeah. I've kind of not necessarily told this story. I don't know if it's a story that much or to many people, but I guess I think there's a lot of ways. I mean, obviously there's a ton of ways to make beer, right? Mm-hmm. And to create things and to express yourself as an artist. And I think beer was a really interesting thing for me to find that way, because it something I noticed, at least in my music, is that I have a hard time deciding when it's finished and being like, all right, I'm cool to share this now. And beer is a little bit different, where you're expressing yourself in this artistic way. You're creating something out of nothing. And maybe it's a style that you've made before, or maybe it's a classic style you have a recipe kind of idea for, or if you're just shooting in the dark, like a lot of our beers are kind of shooting in the dark. Okay. You don't have that with like creating like a painting. You can paint it, right? And you can say, you know what, I'm going to share this when I'm done, when I think it's perfect, or I'm going to go in this direction. And music can be the same way, but with beer, you kind of have a timeline. Like, you make it, and that stuff's ready, and in a couple of weeks, and then you have to talk to your team about, like, well, here's what it's going to be called, here's how to describe it, and like, you don't really have much choice. You have to let it go. And I think that was a really good thing for my development, my creative development as an artist, to kind of have it forced away from me in a not like in a bad way, but like, it's got to go out. It's ready. So. Sure. And then also you have that in a weird way, you have this kind of like, no one necessarily knows who made it, and it doesn't really matter necessarily, but like, you kind of have this anonymity to what it actually is. So you get to create this thing for yourself, for everybody else to enjoy, which is really why you're doing it, right? And you don't have to necessarily say when it's done, because it just is done. And you don't have to watch anybody really enjoy it, because like, it will sell. If you're at a brew public, it's gonna sell.
Sure. At some point,
whether it's a 3% smoked wheat beer, which we had that for a while, but like, sure. Whatever.
Yeah.
And so it was an interesting way for me to get into realize the artist part of what I do, and that I enjoy the most about what I do.
Sure.
To have it kind of like forced out and like, well, it's done, and people like it, so cool.
Yeah.
So it was interesting, but the way that I kind of approach beers, and I realize it's kind of the way I approach music, is not starting out with it depends on what it is, but like, for the most part, beers that we're creating from nothing. Mm-hmm. I don't always have a vision or a goal or like a set parameter of like, I want this, like, I gotta have this thing, because sure. I feel like if I'm putting these guardrails up and a predetermined endpoint, that I am the limiting factor of what that thing could be.
Okay.
Because I don't know. Like, I know how these ingredients will react. I know how to handle yeast. I know that our process is sound. I think this will create something cool. I don't necessarily know what it is, and I don't care.
Sure.
Because I want it to become whatever it's going to become. And that I've worked with people that had a hard time with that. I think that when it's very process driven, when someone is very process driven, which is a very good thing in a brewery, don't get me wrong.
Sure.
For creating is a different thing than the production. But from that point of view, it's really hard to create for me. I can't, and it can be difficult for me to like pick apart how I actually did the process, because it feels like it's coming. I'm listening. I'm putting it out the way that I think it should happen, and that's kind of how I create beer and music a lot the same way, where it's more listening to what's coming to me and just kind of being a very sensitive antenna and transmuting that into music.
Sure.
Like, I'm not necessarily writing. It's coming from somewhere. I don't know where. Somewhere that I love. Seems very peaceful.
Sure.
And it just kind of comes out. And as long as it's good and it helps people and it feels good, I'm doing it. Whatever it is, beer, music, or otherwise.
Yeah. So I mean, there has to be, and I think that's one of the interesting things with people in our field, because I have, a lot of different friends in the industry, a lot of different types of people, a lot of different types of brewers, philosophically, stylistically, creatively, stuff like that. And there is something that is, I don't know, I think there is something challenging about what we do, in the fact that, and listen, you can review a lot of different things. You can go on Google and review a lot of different things, right? You can review your plumber. But yeah, you absolutely can.
And you should.
But for some reason, it can be tough when there is like an app like Untapped, which is relatively pervasive, and I think, like, as brewers, like I really think that we ultimately either come to terms with that element of it, or I think it leads to a lack of satisfaction in what we're doing on some level, right? Because either like you don't care at all, and you never would, and it's legitimate. You know what I mean? Or, like, I don't know. What's your thought on that? Because
Well, I mean,
there is that. Okay, I created this thing, and it's out there now, right? I think that's one of the things that I think that's been a source of development for me. Now, listen, it never feels good to not get XYZ score or whatever, right? Or to hear somebody say something negative about your beer. That stuff never feels good. But I do think it is tied to this creative element of what we're doing.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And I remember having a phone call with the folks at Untapped, and I told them that they had the Yelp of beer, and they're like, no, we don't. I'm like, you literally do.
It kind
checking
of
this
right.
on a
I mean, how is it?
scale. And if I don't claim it, somebody else will claim it. How's that not Yelp?
Yeah.
But
yeah.
it's yeah. Okay, you can. I kind of live by a lot of different agreements, right? And one of them is trying to not take anything personally. I don't take it personally necessarily. Like, no matter what somebody thinks, says, or does, it's coming from their well of experience, their history, who they are as a person, and everybody gets that. Everybody is born with that. Everybody gets that, and or at least should get that. And so, Untapped. Well, people can't do math because there are 5 caps. So each one of them, if it's a 100-point scale, is worth 20. All right. So, like, great beer, I loved it, best beer I've ever had, 3.5. You're like, man, that's a 70. Like, multiply that shit. Like,
my one is always like, listen, if you gave me a quarter of a star or cap or whatever it is, and you say, and it's a coconut beer, and you say, I hate coconut, then why did you? Don't do it. Just check it in.
Right.
Just check it
in. Right. But like, whatever. Like, I don't. Honestly, I don't know if I care. The problem is that I almost need to care, because there are entities, there are beer buyers, there are companies, there are distributors that look at these things as an actual metric, and you're like, are you guys using this? Are you shitting me? Like, because the loudest voice is always the loudest. Like, they're always on there like, no. Like, and it's just like, I don't know. Like, I get it, but I don't, and I don't care, I guess. But it doesn't keep me up at night, and it doesn't influence the way that I work with beers in any
Absolutely.
capacity. Not because I don't care, but because like, well, maybe I don't care. I will take it like, hey, this beer has diacetyl. This beer is flawed in a literal production way, for sure. Yes, and also just reach out to the company if you're going to do that. But like,
Sure.
and most beers shouldn't have that. But if it's more about like, I'd like a little bit more of this, that's never what you see. You're not getting constructive feedback from somebody that knows what they're talking about. And people like what they like, so they are entitled to be like 2 stars, awesome beer. You're like,
Yeah.
thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
well,
It's not like a total. It's actually out of just 5. So
sure.
you're not adding to a bitter total.
All right, everybody, thank you so much for watching. If you feel as if you got any value out of the video, please like and subscribe. There are also other videos that you can watch. They're gonna maybe be over here or over here. Appreciate you watching.